Commander Kirival's crystalline appendages shimmered with barely contained anxiety as she reviewed the docking procedures for the 15th time. The first human peacekeeper was about to board Galactic Peacekeeping Station Delta, and despite 2 decades of commanding the most diverse space station in the known galaxy, she felt woefully unprepared. "Status report," she demanded, her crystalline voice resonating through the command center. Lieutenant Zextor, her Arthrodian second-in-command, clicked his mandibles nervously. "Human transport vessel, horizon maintaining position at designated coordinates. Their atmospheric requirements have been verified, and docking bay 4 has been adjusted to Earth standard gravity." Kirival's surface facets flickered with purple anxiety patterns. The briefing materials on humans have been simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. A species from a death world, evolved under crushing gravity and atmospheric pressures that would shatter most sentient beings. Their endurance alone made them remarkable, but it was their unpredictability that truly concerned her. "Medical team standing by?" she asked, though she'd verified this detail personally no less than 8 times. "Yes, Commander. Though I must note, they're still arguing about what would constitute a medical emergency for a human. Their biology is rather robust." The docking bay's status indicators shifted to green, and Kirival felt her crystalline matrix vibrate with anticipation. "Very well. Time to greet our new crew member. Lieutenant, you have the bridge." The walk to the docking bay seemed longer than usual. Various crew members pressed themselves against the corridors as she passed, their own anxiety about the incoming human evident in their postures and biochemical signatures. The station's rumor mill had been working overtime since the announcement of a human joining the peacekeeping force. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and Lieutenant James Harrison stepped through. Kirival's first impression was simultaneously relief and heightened concern. The human appeared deceptively normal, bipedal, symmetrical, clothed in the standard peacekeeping uniform modified for their species. But there was something about the way he moved, a fluid grace that seemed at odds with what she knew about their dense muscle structure and robust skeletal system. "Lieutenant James Harrison, reporting for duty, Commander." The human's voice was measured, professional, but carried an undertone of what her xenopsychology training identified as enthusiasm. "Welcome aboard Station Delta, Lieutenant. I trust your journey was comfortable." Kirival maintained formal protocols while her sensors gathered data on the human's vital signs. Their heat signature alone was remarkable, like having a small star walking around her station. "Thank you, Commander. The journey was fascinating. Though I have to admit, your ship's AI seemed a bit confused about human dietary requirements. I had to convince it that we can't actually digest titanium." Humor. The briefings had warned about this. Humans used it frequently, often in situations that made other species uncomfortable. Kirival decided to press forward with the orientation. "Your quarters have been prepared according to human specifications. However, there are several areas of the station that will remain restricted until we can properly assess human compatibility with various environmental conditions." Harrison nodded, but Kirival noticed his eyes scanning everything, analyzing, assessing. Another disconcerting human trait: their constant awareness of their surroundings, a predator's instinct wrapped in a civilized exterior. As they walked through the station's main concourse, the regular buzz of activity dimmed noticeably. Various species stopped their tasks to observe the human, some with obvious fear, others with poorly concealed curiosity. A group of floatlings even forgot to maintain their levitation field and had to be caught by their safety nets. "I understand there's some concern about my presence," Harrison said quietly, somehow sensing the tension. "I want to assure you, Commander, that I'm here to learn and contribute, not to disrupt station operations." "Your reassurance is appreciated, Lieutenant. However, you must understand our caution. Your species has a rather impressive reputation." Harrison's face made a movement that Kirival recognized as a smile, though it didn't quite match the examples in her briefing materials. "Commander, I promise to do my best not to live up to that reputation. Unless, of course, the situation absolutely requires it. That last statement, delivered with what humans called a straight face, did nothing to alleviate Curivel's concerns. As they approached the security briefing room, she found herself wondering if the Galactic Council had made the right decision in accepting humans into the peacekeeping force. Either way, she suspected life aboard Station Delta was about to become considerably more interesting. The station's primary training facility fell silent as Lieutenant Harrison entered. The massive chamber, designed to accommodate beings from across the galaxy, suddenly felt small with his presence. Chief Training Officer Vexnar, a towering selenoid whose metallic scales usually gleamed with confidence, watched the human with all four of his optical sensors. Lieutenant, Vexnar's voice resonated through his crystalline vocalization chamber. We've modified Training Bay 3 for human physiological parameters. Though I must admit your species' capabilities remain somewhat unclear to us. Harrison surveyed the array of holographic obstacle courses, gravity wells, and combat simulation chambers with poorly concealed excitement. Happy to clarify anything, Chief, though I notice everyone seems to be giving me a rather wide berth. Indeed, the usual morning training groups had gradually migrated to the far corners of the facility. A cluster of ethereals had even shifted themselves partially out of phase, their standard response to potential threats. Perhaps a basic assessment would be appropriate, Vexnar suggested, gesturing toward what appeared to be a simple obstacle course. This is our standard Class C evaluation track. Most new recruits. Before he could finish, alarms blared throughout the facility. Commander Curivel's voice crystallized through the station's communication system. Security alert in Cargo Bay 7. All available Peacekeepers respond. Containment protocols in effect. Harrison was moving before the announcement finished. Vexnar's optical sensors widened as the human covered the distance to the exit in what seemed like impossible time. Lieutenant, that bay is currently experiencing gravitational fluctuations. It's not safe for, but Harrison was already gone. Vexnar clicked his emergency communicator. Commander, the human is heading toward Cargo Bay 7. Should I attempt to intercept? Negative. Curivel's response carried an unusual harmonic of resignation. Multiple containment failures reported. We need all available help. The scene in Cargo Bay 7 was chaos. A shipment of quantum-locked stasis pods had malfunctioned, creating pockets of distorted spacetime throughout the chamber. 3 dock workers were trapped in a bubble of accelerated time, while cargo containers floated in random patterns, occasionally phasing through each other. Harrison arrived to find Commander Curivel coordinating rescue efforts from a safe distance. Commander, what's the situation? Lieutenant, you shouldn't be. She stopped as a cargo container suddenly materialized above them. Harrison moved with startling speed, pulling her clear as the container crashed down. The stasis pods are deteriorating, she continued, recovering quickly. We can't get close enough to stabilize them without being caught in the time distortions. We need to wait for the containment team to. How long until complete failure? Harrison interrupted, studying the chaos with intense focus. Approximately 3 minutes, but the gravitational fluctuations make it impossible to. Permission to attempt rescue, Commander. Curivel's crystalline structure flickered with alarm patterns. Absolutely not. The gravitational forces alone would crush most species. Harrison's lips curved into that unsettling human expression. Good thing I'm not most species. Those workers have seconds left from their perspective. We don't have time to wait. Before anyone could stop him, Harrison was running straight into the distortion field. The assembled Peacekeepers watched in horror as he navigated through the shifting gravity wells, his movements precise despite the chaos around him. He reached the first stasis pod, anchored himself against a fixed point, and began working on its control panel. Impossible, Vexnar whispered, having just arrived. The gravitational forces in there must be at least 8 times standard, Curivel finished, her voice carrying harmonics of disbelief. He's compensating for the fluctuations through pure physical adaptation. Harrison's voice crackled through the comm system, distorted by the temporal interference. Commander, I stabilized the first pod, but the others are cascading. Request permission to attempt something extremely stupid. Define extremely stupid, Lieutenant. I'm going to use the gravitational fluctuations to create a slingshot effect. Should give me enough speed to reach the other pods before they fail completely. That's not stupid, Lieutenant. That's suicide. Only if I miss. And with that, Harrison released his anchor point, allowing himself to be caught in one of the gravity wells. What followed defied several laws of physics and most of the station's safety protocols. The human used the changing gravitational forces like a complex network of acceleration paths, bouncing from one distortion to another with calculated precision. The assembled crowd watched in stunned silence as Harrison reached each pod in succession, his movements becoming faster and more fluid as he adapted to the chaotic environment. When the final pod was stabilized and the trapped workers were safe, he emerged from the bay covered in sweat, but otherwise unharmed. Commander Curival's crystalline surface displayed patterns that hadn't been seen in her species for generations, a combination of relief, amazement, and something approaching fear. Lieutenant, that was reckless, dangerous, violated about 15 safety protocols, Harrison suggested, checking the rescued workers for signs of temporal displacement. Effective, she finished, though we will need to discuss your interpretation of standard procedures. As medical teams arrived to treat the shaken dock workers, Vexnar approached Harrison. Lieutenant, about that basic assessment. Still interested in seeing what humans can do. I believe, the training chief said carefully, we may need to recalibrate our understanding of basic. The emergency alert came during third shift, when Station Delta was operating on minimal crew. Commander Curival's crystalline form pulsed with alarm frequencies as she materialized in the command center, her rest cycle abruptly terminated. Report, she demanded, interfacing with the central command matrix. Lieutenant Harrison was already there, studying the holographic display with intense concentration. He'd been on station for 3 weeks now, and despite initial concerns, had proven himself surprisingly adaptable to station protocols. Mostly. Distress signal from Outpost 7, the human explained, manipulating the display with practiced ease. They've gone into complete lockdown. Last transmission mentioned something about their containment labs. Curival's surface rippled with concern patterns. Outpost 7 housed some of the most dangerous biological samples in the quadrant. Quarantine protocols. Active, but failing. Environmental systems are degrading rapidly. Harrison's voice carried that particular human tone she'd learned to recognize, the one that preceded what he called creative solutions. Lieutenant, whatever you're thinking. Permission to lead a rescue team, Commander. Harrison turned to face her, his expression serious. The outpost's artificial gravity is fluctuating wildly. Most species would be incapacitated, but I can function in those conditions. And the potentially lethal pathogens. Human immune systems are remarkably robust. Plus, he added with that disconcerting smile, I'm up to date on my shots. Before Curival could respond, the station's AI interrupted. Alert. Outpost 7's containment feels at 30% and falling. Estimated breach in 17 minutes. If those samples get loose. Harrison left the sentence unfinished. The entire sector would have to be quarantined. Curival completed the thought. Her decision crystals pulsed with rapid calculations. You have authorization, Lieutenant, but you'll need a team. I volunteer, came a resonant voice from the doorway. Chief Vexnar entered, his metallic scales reflecting the emergency lights. My environment suit can handle brief exposure to most pathogens. Harrison nodded. We'll need a tech specialist too. Someone who can interface directly with the outpost's systems. That would be me. A new voice hummed from above as Technician Zinra descended from her usual position near the ceiling, her energy form contained within a specialized field projector. As a being of pure energy, she could interface with computer systems directly. A human, a solenoid, and an energy being walk into a disaster zone, Harrison muttered. Sounds like the start of one of our jokes. Lieutenant, Hirival's tone carried harmonics of both authority and concern. This is not a time for humor. Actually, Commander for humans, this is exactly the time for humor. Helps us focus. He turned to his newly formed team. Gear up. We launch in 5 minutes. The journey to Outpost 7 took 12 tense minutes in the station's fastest shuttle. Harrison piloted while Vexnar monitored the outpost's deteriorating status, and Zinra prepared her interface protocols. Containment fields at 18%. Vexnar reported as they approach. Gravity fluctuating between 0.3 and 12 standard. Life support failing in multiple sections. Harrison's hands moved across the controls with fluid precision. Zinra, can you link with their systems from here? The energy being's form pulsed with affirmative frequencies. Partial connection established. Their AI is offline, but I'm detecting active power signatures in the main lab. That's our target then. Harrison began their approach. Vexnar, what are we dealing with in there? Based on manifest data, samples from at least 30 deathworlds, including the solenoid scales shifted to a worried copper hue, several from Earth. Well, Harrison's lips curved into that expression that always made Kirival's crystals vibrate with concern. At least we'll have something in common. The shuttle's docking procedure was anything but standard. Harrison had to compensate for the random gravity fluctuations, essentially wrestling the ship into position. As they prepared to board, he turned to his team. Remember, we move fast, we stay together, and most importantly, if I tell you to run, you run. No heroics from anyone except the Deathworlder. Clear. Both aliens indicated agreement in their respective ways. Harrison sealed his helmet, checked his team's equipment one final time, and opened the airlock. The scene inside Outpost 7 was like something from human nightmare imagery. Emergency lights cast strobing shadows through corridors where gravity seemed to have a mind of its own. Equipment floated randomly before suddenly crashing to the floor or ceiling as gravitational forces shifted. Harrison moved with the same impossible grace he'd shown in the cargo bay incident, but now it was clearly more than just physical adaptation. He was anticipating the shifts, using them to maintain momentum while ensuring his team stayed anchored. Main lab ahead. Zinra hummed, her energy form flickering with data streams. Warning, detecting multiple containment breaches. Biohazard alerts in adjacent sections. Life signs, Harrison asked, bracing himself against a wall as gravity reversed again. 2, no 3. In the central containment area. But they're fading. Time to containment failure. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Harrison made that human expression again, the one that usually preceded something either brilliant or catastrophic, often both. Right then, time to get creative. Harrison's creative solution became apparent as they reached the main lab's sealed doors. The room beyond was a nightmare of broken containment units and fluctuating gravity fields. Through the observation window, they could see 3 researchers trapped in a sealed chamber, their environmental suits damaged. The containment protocols won't let us open those doors while there's a breach, Vexnar stated, his scales shifting to a frustrated copper tone. Then we make our own door. Harrison began pulling equipment from his pack. Zinra, can you stabilize the gravity in this section? Just for a few seconds. The energy being pulsed with effort. Perhaps, but it will divert power from the remaining containment fields. We only need 10 seconds. Harrison was assembling something that made Vexnar's combat sensors ping with alarm. Chief, remember those training exercises you said were too dangerous for humans? The ones involving concentrated plasma charges. The ones specifically labeled lethal to organic life forms. Those exact ones. Harrison finished his assembly. A makeshift plasma cutter jury-rigged from emergency equipment. Time for a practical demonstration of why humans are classified as Deathworlders. Before either of his teammates could protest, Harrison activated the device. The plasma beam that erupted was hot enough to make even Zinra's energy form recoil. But instead of being incinerated, Harrison began cutting through the lab's reinforced walls with surgical precision. Containment failure in 2 minutes, Vexnar warned, his voice carrying harmonics of both awe and horror. Gravity stabilized, Zinra announced, but I can only hold it for 8 seconds. Harrison worked with impossible speed, the plasma cutter carving a perfect circle through layers of security materials that were supposed to be impenetrable. The heat was so intense it was melting the surrounding walls, but he never flinched. Breach complete, Harrison announced as the cut section fell away. Zinra, release gravity control on my mark. Vexnar, be ready to help with the researchers. What followed was a display of human capabilities that would later be classified as physically improbable in official reports. As soon as Zinra released her hold on the gravity, Harrison launched himself through the opening. He moved through the chaotic space like he was dancing, using the shifting gravitational fields to propel himself toward the trapped researchers. 3, 2, 1. Vexnar counted down as Harrison reached the first researcher, secured them, and literally threw them toward the exit with perfectly calculated force. The solenoid caught them just as gravity shifted again. The second researcher was further in, their suit showing signs of contamination. Harrison didn't hesitate, removing his own helmet and placing it on the researcher before grabbing them and repeating his throwing maneuver. Lieutenant, Zinra's energy form flickered with alarm. The containment fields are about to collapse completely. Harrison had just reached the third researcher when everything went wrong. The gravity shifted violently, multiple containment units failed simultaneously, and alarms screamed through the facility. The human grabbed the last researcher and did something that defied several laws of physics. He ran vertically up a wall, pushed off at precisely the right moment, and used the chaotic gravitational forces like a slingshot. They exploded through the breach opening just as the facility's emergency protocols activated, sealing the lab permanently. Harrison landed hard, shielding the researcher with his own body, his exposed face showing signs of exposure to the contaminants. Medical team. Now, he gasped, making sure the researcher was secure before allowing himself to collapse. Hours later, in Station Delta's medical bay, Commander Kirival stood watching Harrison floating in a regeneration tank. The human's vital signs were stable, if unusual by any normal standard. He should be dead, the medical chief stated, her tentacles waving in confusion. The amount of pathogens he was exposed to. But he isn't dead, Kirival observed, her crystalline surface displaying complex patterns of amazement and concern. No. In fact, his immune system appears to be adapting, integrating the pathogen proteins into his own cellular structure. It's like nothing I've ever seen. Through the tank's transparent walls, Harrison opened his eyes and gave them a thumbs up. A human gesture they'd all learned meant either "I'm fine" or "watch this," neither of which was particularly reassuring. Commander, the medical chief's tentacles twisted nervously. I don't think we've been fully appreciating what it means to be a Deathworlder. Kirival's surface rippled with agreement patterns. No, Doctor. I don't think we have. The Galactic Council's emergency session chamber was packed with representatives from across known space. Commander Kirival stood at the central podium, her crystalline form projecting formal presentation patterns, while Lieutenant Harrison sat quietly in the witness area, looking remarkably composed for someone who had recently survived what should have been a lethal combination of pathogens. So, the council elder's voice resonated through the chamber. You are proposing a complete revision of peacekeeping force protocols based on the actions of a single human. I am proposing, Kirival's harmonics were steady and confident, that we have been underestimating not just humans, but our own potential for adaptation. Lieutenant Harrison's methods may be unorthodox, but they have proven effective in situations where our standard protocols would have failed. Murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. A quantum being shifted forward, their probability field fluctuating with skepticism. The human violated multiple safety protocols, exposed himself to deadly pathogens, and caused significant damage to Outpost 7's infrastructure, and saved 3 lives while preventing a sector-wide biological disaster, Kirival countered. More importantly, he demonstrated something we've been overlooking: the value of controlled chaos. Harrison suppressed a smile as several representatives physically recoiled at the phrase. The council elders' form shimmered with interest patterns. Explain. Our protocols are based on maintaining order at all costs. But the universe isn't orderly. Crisis situations by their nature are chaotic. Lieutenant Harrison's success comes not from ignoring protocols, but from adapting them to meet changing circumstances and the physical impossibilities. A Selenoid representative demanded. The reports from your station describe actions that defy our understanding of biological limitations. Perhaps that's exactly the point. Harrison spoke for the first time, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. You've been measuring limitations based on what you think is possible. We humans learned long ago that impossible is often just a matter of perspective. The chamber erupted in discussions, debates, and several varieties of electromagnetic disagreement. The council elder raised all 4 appendages for silence. Lieutenant Harrison, approach. Harrison stood and walked to the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of thousands of alien eyes, sensors, and probability scanners upon him. You understand the concern your presence causes, the elder stated. Your species emerged from a death world, evolved through constant conflict, and yet here you stand, proposing to teach us about peacekeeping. With respect, Elder, Harrison replied, it's precisely because of our origins that we understand the value of peace. We know the cost of conflict firsthand. But we also know that sometimes maintaining peace requires the ability to operate in chaos. And this is what you offer. This. Controlled chaos. I offer perspective. The ability to see opportunities where others see only obstacles. The willingness to take calculated risks when the situation demands it. And yes, the capability to operate in conditions that others find impossible. Harrison paused, then added with a slight smile. Plus, we make excellent emergency responders. A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the chamber. A rare occurrence in council sessions. The elder's form displayed complex decision patterns for several moments before speaking. Commander Kirival, your proposal is accepted. A new division will be established within the peacekeeping force, focusing on rapid response and adaptive protocols. Lieutenant Harrison will assist in developing training programs to implement these new approaches. The elder turned to address the chamber at large. Perhaps it is time we all learn to embrace a little controlled chaos. As the session concluded, Kirival approached Harrison. Congratulations, Lieutenant. Though I suspect you've just made both our jobs considerably more complicated. Complicated is what we do best, Commander. Harrison grinned. Just wait until they meet the rest of humanity. The rest. Kirival's surface displayed alarm patterns. There are more humans coming. Commander, I'm what we call a cautious human. Wait until you meet some of our real daredevils. Kirival's crystalline structure vibrated with what might have been laughter, might have been terror, but was probably both. As they walked out of the chamber together, she reflected that perhaps this was the true lesson humanity had to teach, that sometimes the most effective way to keep the peace was to be just a little bit dangerous, and that the best way to face an impossible situation was to redefine what impossible meant. Back on Station Delta, a new sign appeared in the training facility. Warning: human-level training in progress. It became both a caution and a challenge as more species began to push their own perceived limitations, inspired by the Deathworlders, who had shown them that boundaries were often more flexible than they appeared. And somewhere in the station's recreational area, Harrison was teaching a group of fascinated aliens about something he called Parker, while Commander Kirival pretended not to notice that several safety protocols were being cheerfully redefined. The galaxy would never be quite the same again, and that perhaps was exactly what it needed.